The road to leadership is never a straight line. On this podcast, I'm interviewing the world's most interesting leaders about their mountaintop moments, their stumbling blocks, and everything in between. I'm Jonathan Block, and this is Stumbling Blocks: How Great Leaders Are Made. Hello, and welcome to The Stumble. My guest today is Steve Scherer, who until recently was the bureau chief of Reuters for all of Canada. A journalist whose life took an unexpected turn from covering world leaders like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and reporting on the European migrant crisis to driving for Uber. Stephen's Substack essay about this change has become a powerful flashpoint for the discussion around job displacement and economic anxiety in America and around the world. We discuss the fight he got into with the Prime Minister of Italy, what he saw as he covered the world's most dangerous immigration journey across the Mediterranean Sea, and the lessons he's learning as he hands over the keys to a profession that offered him leverage and a powerful platform and slides into the driver's seat of an Uber. I too recently lost my job about a year and a half ago, and I've had the remarkable opportunity to reinvent myself and forge a new path forward, including through this podcast and by launching a consulting business that helps executives like my podcast guests lead their companies through transformation. A massive net of friends and colleagues and family have helped me along the way, and all of you listeners are helping me find my new way forward as well. I want to just pause and say thank you. Especially, I want to thank my listener Reed in Manhattan, who reached out and said she loves the slate of guests. Spinner, who reached out from upstate South Carolina and said he just listened to Charles Green's interview on the trust equation and is weaving it into a speech he's giving. And of course, to my mama, who left a review on Apple Podcasts that says, "Always interesting, usually inspiring, and frequently humbling. I'm a better person for hearing these accounts. Mama, I'm a better person for being your son. Thanks to you and Dad for cheering me on as I've navigated all of life's stumbling blocks. I love you both." And now, here's Stephen Scherer. Stephen, thank you so much for joining the show. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Absolutely. You are former bureau chief for Reuters of their Canada operation based in the capital of Canada in Ottawa. But most recently, you are most famous for writing a piece on Substack that has gone viral called "My Journey from Foreign Correspondent to Uber Driver in Trump's America." And the subtitle is, "I once documented human displacement and desperation. Now I'm living it." And it's gone viral. It's hit a chord in America as so many people are navigating what it looks like to either be laid off or face displacement or have neighbors or friends who are facing displacement. And even I think the word desperation in your subtitle is hitting a nerve with folks where they feel just a sense of everything is changing all at once. And you have kind of crystallized it in a beautiful way. I think we have so much to learn from you. Thanks again for jumping on the show today. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here.
So I wonder, can you tell us about your article that has just gone viral and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, it's a personal essay, actually, which is a format that, as you can imagine, isn't common within agency journalism, which is what I was used to. I was used to, writing the news of the day, the biggest news of the day coming out of whatever capital I was working in. For 21 years, that was Rome. And then for the last 5 years, when I was bureau chief in Ottawa, it was about the big news coming out of Canada for the day. I wanted to write something that was completely different from the kind of writing I had done as a journalist. And I also wanted to kind of discover, if I'd gotten to be a better writer over the past 30 years. I mean, granted, there's a lot of writing involved in journalism, right? That's part of it. But the bigger element, and most people probably don't know this about being a journalist, is reporting. I mean, most of the time you're just trying to get the facts straight. And then once you have the facts straight, they kind of just go down on paper naturally, right? I mean, once you learn how to write a news story, one is not terribly different from another. What changes is the reporting inside them. So I wanted to, and I did that as an objective journalist, working in international news organizations, mainly Bloomberg and Reuters, and trying to present balanced stories without putting myself in them. In fact, in journalism, you're not supposed to become part of the story. You're supposed to witness it and tell it, but not become part of it. So
which is why if you're reading a story and it says something like, sources told Reuters or sources told Bloomberg, the sources actually told the reporter who wrote the story, but you write in the third person, right?
That's exactly right. So this was an effort to write in the first person. And, after 30 years of objectivity, of seeking objectivity in my writing, I got to try and seek my own voice, speak with my own voice and write with my own voice. And that's what I did.
So it's clearly struck a chord here. For those who haven't read your piece, kind of walk us through it.
Well,
What's the premise?
I mean, I guess the place to start is when I lost my job. I lost my job in March of 2024. So it was 23 months ago. And I was in Canada. I was, management, right? I wasn't protected by a union or the guild, which, we have both in Canada and the States. And, that was an issue. I had my whole family in Ottawa, 3 kids, my wife, I had bought a house.
And what was your role? Tell us just a bit. And when you say you were in management, tell us a little bit about what that means.
Well, I was a bureau chief. A bureau chief in journalism is like the head of the newsroom in a certain city, right? I'd always worked, in Italy, I was in Rome and I wasn't the bureau chief, but, I covered the government and politics and the economy and all kinds of things really. But it was in a newsroom, right? And I had a bureau chief there. So the bureau chief is kind of the boss of the newsroom, most of the time in a capital, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I was.
Which is a pretty big deal to be the head honcho of a newsroom in one of the G7 countries in particular, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was my big dream as a journalist, was to be, a bureau chief in a G7 country. And I managed to do it, granted in probably the quietest capital. But it was a great experience, and I enjoyed it. I really did take it seriously, and I had a good run. I thought, I would handle all of the sort of relations between the institutions, because you are, as a major news organization, you have a relationship really with officials in the government, with industry associations, companies, and so on. So I did a lot of that.
So tell us a little bit about the kinds of people that you were familiar with covering, or that you covered or had relationships with.
Well, I mean, I interviewed the Prime Minister Trudeau, more than once. I came down to cover him when he was went to the White House. There was a Three Amigos meeting, which is, Mexico, U.S., and Canada get together now and then, the heads of government, and they had a meeting in Washington. So I went to the Oval Office with Trudeau to cover, that of his trip there. It was
Sure.
an official visit. I covered a lot of policy, 2 elections. So, I followed Trudeau in particular in the second election all over the country for about a month. And so I reported on the campaign. Central bank was part of my remit. Central bank reporting means talking to the governor of the central bank and writing, stories for Wall Street, really. I mean,
Sure.
people who buy bonds and currencies and so on, moving markets at times with news, right?
Yeah.
So, it was a high level of journalism. I mean,
Yeah.
news at a high level under pressure because, it's important to be first when the markets are watching.
And so just pause there for a quick sec, because I think, the difference between what you do and what a newspaper does is quite interesting, right? Because as a wire organization, your articles are placed in newspapers all over the world.
Yeah.
And so can you tell us just a little bit about that? Where might your work have been placed? Where might you have run? Who might have bought essentially your work?
They would go into any newspaper. I mean, it could be the New York Times, it could be the Wall Street Journal. You would read it in or on the web, right? On, people that subscribe to Reuters might have a feed or a connection to them. And they like, I don't know, let's see, Apple News, for example, carry both of them, right? So you see stories from Reuters and Bloomberg on Apple News. So,
sure,
yeah.
Or your Google News feed or your Yahoo News feed might have.
Yeah. Yahoo is another one. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty much anywhere.
So you're chief of the Canada Bureau for Reuters. You're following leaders like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You're going to the Oval Office. You're following Trudeau on the campaign trail, writing stories about him that are placed all over the world on people's phones. The first thing they wake up sometimes is the articles that you're writing, and you're moving markets at times. Then what happens?
I've seen other people in my situation. I've seen it happen to many other people, but you always just kind of say, well, I hope it's not me. I hope it's, never happens to me. And then it did.
Mm-hmm.
It was part of budget cuts, the company said. And, I was I had probably one of the higher salaries in the newsroom because of my position.
Sure.
So, I was cut and that was it. Now, the big problem for me was that my work permit was tied to my job. So
Hmm.
when I lost my job, I lost my freedom to work in Canada.
Hmm.
And that's a big problem because I needed to work. I just, I have to still work. My kids are in high school. I'm not near retirement. I haven't saved up nearly enough to go into retirement. So, that was a big issue. And that was when, I really had to come to terms eventually with the fact that I was going to have to leave Canada. That it did take time to get to that point. And I tried to actually do a lot of things and, find work in Canada, find sponsorship. I had already tried to get what they call permanent residency, which is like a green card in the United States. You have a point system, and this point system is made up of like your age, how many kids you have, what your educational level is, if you speak the language. There's all kinds of things, and one of them is whether you're employed or not.
Mm.
So as soon as I lost my job, I lost every possibility of getting a green card, essentially, and being able to work there. And so, I then had to fix up my house, do all the stuff you do before you sell a house, and then I listed the house in the spring, and I was lucky to have that house, I guess, to have equity, something that I could sell that would give me some cash to live on until I found another job. I had hoped to stay there until my kids were out of high school. That was the plan, get them through high school in Canada, get permanent residency. That gives them the opportunity to go to university in Canada, which is much less expensive than university in the United States. And it's quite good. So that was kind of my well laid plan going into Canada was, well, my kids will graduate from high school there and then they'll go to college and it won't cost me, I don't have a college fund for all three of them. So maybe I can afford it. And then that fell apart. So I had to time our departure from Canada with the end of their school year.
Hmm.
And as soon as school was out, I closed the house and we left.
Hmm. And where are your kids? Where are your kids and wife now?
Well, they left on July 1st. They got on a plane in Montreal and flew to Italy. The idea was, well, hopefully it's just 2 months, just the summer, but I didn't find a job. So then
And are they Italian?
Sorry?
Are they Italian, your kids?
Yeah, my kids were all born in Rome. My wife's
Yeah.
Italian.
Yeah.
So they went when they went to Italy for the summer, they went to my wife's hometown in southern Italy. It's called Potenza, and they stayed with family and friends, and went to the beach, and had a good summer. Really,
Yeah.
my kids worked a little bit, which was important to me. I wanted them to learn to make some money and so on. But then when my wife and I decided, since I hadn't found a job, to keep everyone there, because first of all, they had state health care, which is always something that can be useful when you have kids who, my son broke his arm skateboarding in Canada. So we were
Sure.
fortunate to have healthcare
Sure.
at the time there. So they stayed there and went to school for a semester and then discovered that they didn't like the Italian high school system. So they didn't like the Italian school system. They wanted to go to school here. And I said, okay. And even though I didn't have a job, I looked for a bigger place to live and I moved them here in Virginia. And so now the kids are here with me, but my wife is still in Italy. She comes back and forth. She's afraid of Trump's America in part.
Mm.
There's been stories in the New York Times about couples going to do a very routine green card interview, and
Mhm.
one of the spouses being picked up and deported right from the interview,
Yeah.
So that scares her,
Sure. It would scare me too.
Like I said, there's free healthcare in Italy. She needs that. She has a need to be monitored. She has some health issues.
Hmm.
And, if you look on the news, the international news, they're showing ICE killing protesters, ICE
Yeah.
dragging away children, that's what you see from outside the United States.
Hmm.
And she's scared of that. And so, she's coming back and forth with the tourist visa now, which isn't terribly, it doesn't last very long.
Hmm.
Hopefully we'll get an extended one soon. But yeah, she's still in Italy and I'm here with the kids and, they're
And
in
so you're
school. They've been there for about a month. It's going very well. They like it here. It's Northern Virginia. It's a really good school.
And so your Substack piece that has gone viral talks about your work as an Uber driver. And I want to just read from it really briefly. You write, on my first morning driving for Uber, everyone I picked up was a Latino or South Asian, and they were all going for work. You say your first 3 customers were school teachers, and then you dropped someone at a hospital, a grocery store, a mechanic's garage, a Panera. And then you write, I made $100 in a little less than 5 hours. And so I wonder if you can kind of take us into the decision to drive for Uber?
So I decided to do Uber because it's ultra flexible. It's Uber flexible. You can do it, all you need is a car and a driver's license.
Yeah.
And I needed that. I have 3 kids that I'm taking care of. I'm trying to apply for jobs in my field.
Hmm.
I'm trying to meet people and network. So Uber just seemed like a really flexible job. I could push the button on my phone and start anytime, anywhere, and do it as long as I wanted and then stop.
Hmm.
And that's absolutely true. It is super flexible. You can do that, and you can make a little money, and it's nice. But it's not much money. It's really not very lucrative. You spend a lot of time in the car and you don't get a lot out of it. I did just sell my house, so I do have some savings. But, I know that savings disappear. I mean, if you don't make any money, eventually it's going to be gone.
Yeah.
So I just did it so that I could at least have some money coming in. And that's
Hmm.
how I've been using it. So I'd say I do it really part time. And especially since I published the essay, I've had this, enormous reaction that's brought me some more writing jobs, some more writing money, freelancing
Hmm.
kind of things. And, I'd rather write than drive,
Sure.
actually, especially if it makes me more money.
Yeah.
And so, if I have something to write, I do that. And then, if I have some time to burn, I'll do the Uber. My clients, my customers were just, like me. They were going to work in the morning. They were service industry jobs mostly. And, everybody really just trying to do their best and get by.
Hmm.
And so I was struck by that. I was also struck by other things like, for example, you're invisible to people as an
Mm.
Uber driver. People don't really look you in the eye. They don't really notice you or anything. You're just, getting them from one spot to another.
I would
And I
imagine that
think,
was quite different for you, having come from interviewing
yeah,
leaders like Justin Trudeau, who I'm sure looked you in the eye and answered your questions. What was that like?
exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what you're saying. I mean, I came from doing a profession where my name and the credibility that I had established over 25 years was important. Like, I
Hmm.
wanted people to know my name because I wanted them to know that I was a credible reporter, and I wanted them to
Hmm.
look up my stories. And, that's what government officials do.
Sure.
Oh, this guy wants an interview. Let's go look at what he's written. Right. So
Yeah.
people know who you are when you're a reporter, even if you're not a famous reporter. The people that you're covering, they know who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I worked in press, we all knew the reporters who covered us and by name.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I had lots of interactions with Chrystia Freeland, who was the finance minister, and like I said, the central bank. These people, important people knew me,
Yeah.
and they knew my
Yeah.
name. And then when you do a service industry job, you're just invisible. Nobody knows your name. They barely even look at it. They barely look you in the face. And that's the way it is. Just think about when you go to Starbucks or whatever in the morning. Most of the time, you don't really recognize you don't know the person who's serving you, or and you hardly look at them. You're just getting a coffee and you're on your way. And that's just a very different feeling from what I was used to.
How is that experience of being invisible? How is it changing you?
I think it makes me more humble. I try to be humble anyway. I've always tried to be humble, even as a quote unquote hotshot journalist or whatever. I didn't feel like I was special. But I do think that, I think that that we take, I don't know if we don't, do we take for granted the people that we see every day who have very humble jobs, and maybe they don't pay a lot or whatever, but they do their jobs, and they serve us coffee and they serve us food and they help us, do so many things for very little pay, really,
Mm.
and very little recognition. And I just have, I think, a new respect for that. I mean, I think that everybody is just trying to get by the best they can, and we need to watch out for each other. We're all going through life together, really. We're not separate. Yeah, we're separate in that we go home to a different home where we have different families, we have different friends. All that's true, but we interact with each other every day. The highest levels, well, maybe not the highest level, but very wealthy people go get coffee.
Hmm.
Very wealthy people
Yeah.
do, they interact with very humble people every day,
Yeah.
and we all do that. And I think that, and I also think that this is true. And I had a writer or a reader send me this, but we're not all that different. Wealthy, poor, American, Italian, Canadian, Romanian.
Yeah.
We're all, there's a lot more that connects us than divides us.
Yeah.
And I think
So
that's
Stephen, next time you're let's say buying a coffee,
yeah.
how will your interaction with the barista be different today or tomorrow than it was, let's say, 24 months ago?
I think that I think I was always polite, and I've always been that guy that was nice to his waitress and all that, right? But you know how when you get bad service sometimes, and it bothers people. Well, I just try not to be bothered by that. People have bad days, Maybe they're having a bad day. You don't know what happened to them. So I think I just try to give people a break,
Mm,
because everything's hard, Sometimes a little humor helps,
yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if it changed me in a real fundamental sense because, I think I was already there. At the same time, it did open my eyes to the fact that I could be one of them. I went from having my identity very tied to my profession, first of all, right? I mean,
Mm,
I'm a journalist, right?
yeah.
I always, I've been saying that for 25 years, at least more. And so it becomes part of your identity. And this whole thing about being together or divided also, I think, is important in America today because we are so divided. When I came back to the United States after 28 years, which is a long time, right? I
Hmm.
came back on July 4th after 28 years abroad. It did not feel comfortable to me. It did not feel like home.
Why not? Why didn't it feel like home?
Well,
What
I
had
mean, part of it
changed?
is just because I literally haven't lived here in 28 years. So
Sure,
my
sure.
home
That's a
was
long time.
elsewhere, right? I mean, I had made my home in Rome. I had made my home in Ottawa.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, because I didn't recognize the country that I came back to. To me, the United States in 1997, which was when I left, it was much different than it is today. Maybe that was me as a 27-year-old kid, with a good education and lots of dreams. But I think that there's elements that are disconnected from that. I think it's a darker place. I think it's a place where people feel like they have less in common than they used to. Like,
Mm,
they're more focused on what divides them than what brings them together.
hmm.
I think that it's a place where, um, where your dreams don't come true like they used. The American dream isn't the same. I think many Americans are going through an identity crisis
Hmm.
because we don't recognize ourselves in the government. We don't see ourselves. We have more morality and more ethics than the government does. Like we have a
Mm,
different view of how to treat immigrants than the government does.
hmm.
We have a
Hmm.
different view of how to treat former presidents
Mm,
than our president does.
hmm. Hmm.
And I think that there's a disconnect between what is coming out of the White House and what the majority of Americans think and feel and believe what it means to the majority of Americans to be American. Like,
Yeah. What?
being upset when American Olympians criticize the actions of their government on immigration, I think is what makes America great, right?
Hmm.
We can do
Hmm.
that. We can criticize our country while we're representing it. Whereas, the White House thinks that's awful, that they're losers, that they're,
Hmm.
I don't remember the exact comment that Trump
Sure.
made, but
Sure.
you get the idea,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Chinese and the Russians can't criticize their
Right.
government when they're at the Olympics, but the Americans can, and they
Yeah.
should if that's what they think. They're allowed to have it's freedom of speech, right?
Hmm.
So I just feel very much like I came back to a country that doesn't have the same morals that I have. And what's worse is that it's it's I think drifting toward an economic uh I don't know, downturn or recession or slump that is going to hurt us even more, especially
Yeah.
people like low incomes and people like me who are unemployed.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to come back to that. But first, I wonder if you can just take us back in time a little bit. You were raised in the Midwest in Indiana, and you have just said that you left the States for 28 years to work all over the world. Walk us through the highlights of what you did in those 28 years.
Well, the first thing I did was I went to Romania to teach English because I was curious. I was curious to see how the former, Eastern Bloc, was developing after the fall of the wall, after the
Hmm.
Soviet Union disintegrated. I wanted to see how the former Warsaw Pact countries were developing. And I went to Romania because Romanian is basically a Romance language. It's a lot like Italian. I already spoke Italian. I'd been an exchange student when I was 16 and left Muncie, Indiana to go live in Bergamo, Italy, northern Italy. And I went to high school there for a year, learned Italian, lived with an Italian family. And it was a great experience,
I'm
just
sure.
really, really amazing experience. So I had I had that sort of exploratory, that wanderlust from a young age, that curiosity from a young age. Yeah, I lived in Romania or in Transylvania, which is kind of like the biggest region in Romania, famous for, Dracula and so on.
Sure.
And it was great. But I couldn't make a living there. It was just didn't pay that well. So I decided to move to Italy, where I still had contacts with my host family from previous, from when I was a, teenager. And so I moved to Italy, and then within 3 months, I had a job with a news organization. I had already gotten my degree and a master's in journalism, so that helped.
Yeah.
It helped that I spoke Italian as well, and that was it. That was it. Once I found my first journalism job in Italy, I stayed there for 21 years, and it covered all kinds of things, including 10 years at least of Silvio Berlusconi. He was the
Yeah.
former prime minister who was very much I'd say, a precursor of Trump style politics.
Hmm.
It's basically politics by theater, right?
Right. Yeah. Tell us what you saw as you covered Berlusconi.
Well, yeah, I mean, really that. I mean, his Silvio Berlusconi's objective was to be the front page news on the top of the fold every day. And it didn't matter if it was good news or bad news. It was kind of like that P.T. Barnum saying, no, what is it?
Any publicity is good
All
publicity.
publicity is good publicity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was his philosophy. He didn't care, if it offended people, it didn't matter. As long as he was the center of discussion, as long as he was at the center of what everyone was thinking and talking about during the day, at least news-wise, for anyone who follows, I guess, news. But in Italy, people follow politics probably even more than here. So he really dominated the Italian mind for a decade because of this strategy.
You write in one of your pieces, you write that Berlusconi rebranded politics as entertainment. He wore funny hats. He sang French songs. He cracked jokes. He projected a smiling image of well-being and flamboyant wealth, which sounds strangely familiar.
Yeah, it sounds like the reality show president we have now, doesn't it? It's entertainment as politics. And now we also have information as entertainment, right? I mean, what is TikTok? What is, it really, I think Neil Postman wrote a story about television and how it was affecting American education, right? The American mind.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that we were amusing ourselves to death. There was no longer, public debate or discourse. It was just entertainment, right? And I think that we've taken that much further now than in the 80s, So Berlusconi really ran with that idea that it did not matter, as long as people were, watching the next episode, that was all that mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear that from Trump all the time. Oh, you have terrible ratings, or nobody reads you anymore. Your newspaper's losing money. His measure of success is, how many people are watching, and how many people, So anyway, I followed Berlusconi for a long time. I had some real run-ins with Berlusconi as a reporter too.
Tell us about a few of them.
Well, when Barack Obama was elected, I don't know if you remember this, some people will. Berlusconi was actually in Russia on an official state visit to Moscow.
I didn't know that. No.
Well, yeah, I mean, but it was something, it had nothing to do with the American election, but he happened to be in Moscow.
Yeah.
And he was at a press conference and somebody asked him, just basically his reaction. Oh, the first Black American president has been elected, do you have any thoughts? And his thought was, well, he's tall, handsome, and suntanned. Do you remember that?
I don't.
No. Well, that was his comment, which he thought was hilarious. And everybody at the press conference, the Russians, thought it was a great joke, that he was tall, handsome, and suntanned. And so, when someone then later said to him, hey, did you really mean that? Like, did you, he said, it was a joke. He wouldn't back down, right? It's just like, it was a joke, right? Just like Trump does, right? When he says something really offensive, Oh, it was just a joke. And so anyway, I was in Brussels the next day where there was an EU summit, and I went to the press conference and I managed to get the microphone. And I said, look, I grew up in the United States. I'm American, and calling a black man suntanned it's considered offensive. It's
Yeah.
an offensive thing to say.
Yeah.
And I just didn't give him any room. I said, why don't you apologize? I don't know if you noticed, but strong men like Trump, like Berlusconi, like Putin, they don't apologize for anything ever.
Yeah.
It's a political rule for them not to
Yeah.
apologize because it shows weakness. So obviously he didn't. He said, you should apologize to Italy. He basically called me an imbecile.
Hmm.
He put me on a list of imbeciles. Anybody who would think that that wasn't a joke was an imbecile. And he got up and he stormed out of the press conference. And then later I had a run in with his finance minister, a guy named Giulio Tremonti. They were passing a policy that essentially made it legal to not pay taxes because it was an amnesty for people who had not paid taxes and who were facing, essentially, who were in dispute with the state over their taxes, right?
Mm.
So he gave them what they called a scudo fiscale. It was an amnesty to not have to pay those taxes. So I asked a fairly, strong question to the finance minister about that. I said, why are you guys helping out tax, evaders?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, he called me a dickhead on live television. And so anyway, I had these run-ins with his government.
Which sounds so, it sounds just not unlike, President Trump was asked a tough question a few days ago by Caitlin Collins of CNN, and he,
Right.
instead of answering, said, "You don't smile enough," and no one watches CNN.
A man telling a woman she doesn't smile enough.
Yeah. In any role that I've ever had, I would have been fired on the spot for saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the same playbook. It's the same playbook we're seeing today in Washington, only it's like turbocharged here compared to Italy, to be honest.
I want to jump in and ask you. You write a lot about, of course, Berlusconi, who you've just told us a bit about, but you also write that for several years you covered the deadliest migration route in the world, and of course, immigrants and immigration and deportation has been so much in the news in the States here. And so I want to just read a little bit of what you've written, and then ask you to talk about what you saw in Italy and what you're seeing here with fresh eyes, right? The eyes of someone who hasn't lived in the country for 28 years, but is an American, knows America well. And so I'm going to read, quote, "For several years, I covered the deadliest migration route in the world across the Mediterranean Sea to Italy from Libya or Tunisia. Some 26,000 migrants are estimated to have died attempting this passage since 2014 in just 12 years, a number roughly equivalent to half of America's dead in the Vietnam. At the time I was documenting the contours of human displacement, I didn't understand what would drive a person to attempt such a dangerous passage, especially with children. Now I'm closer to understanding that kind of desperation." Can you take us into covering that place and also what you see in America?
Yeah. I'd say in my career as a journalist, it was the most moving story I ever followed. Essentially I followed the humanitarian crisis, for 5 years. And I give credit to Reuters for that, because that's a choice that the news organization made to follow something where there's no money for them, right? I mean, you're not covering financial news that's going to move the markets.
Right.
I followed that, and that meant going to Sicily, going to Lampedusa. I would get on the trains with some of the migrants, because what happened was when they would finally get to Italy, they would usually go elsewhere. So they go to Germany or France or northern, even Scandinavia, and they'd take the trains up. So I would get on the trains. I'd talk to them. They would have camps at different places along the line, outside of train stations, and they would find places where they could sleep, for a day or two, just to rest, and I went on ships twice. I went on 2 different ships that went out to rescue migrants who were leaving from Libya.
What was that like?
I saw people, especially when they would bring them back to port. I saw the body bags. Lots of people died. I saw abandoned boats at sea, so you don't know what happened to them. I saw lots of people rescued. On one trip with an NGO, with 2 NGOs, they ran a ship called the Aquarius. It's kind of a famous ship at the time. When I went out with them, we picked up 530 people in one day, and they were all
530 people.
Yeah, and that's women, that's men, women, and children, right? And they were on big rubber rafts that would have never, ever in a million years made it to Sicily. Like they would have never made it if the NGO ships hadn't been there. They would have all died.
What happened to those 530 people?
Well, they got on they were brought onto the ship. It's very risky when you rescue people at sea, especially people who don't know how to swim, who don't have life jackets, who don't speak. You don't know which language they speak, right? They might not speak English. They might not speak French. They might not speak Italian. You don't know. You try several, and you have to keep them calm. And, the crews really, they practice it. It's a really serious operation. The ones that do it are really concerned about the people. They're there to save lives. And they know so many tricks, really, to try and keep people calm, how to get people from one boat to another, how then to get them on the ship, what to look for, in terms of injuries, in terms of health.
You write that sometimes you'd find men who had been smuggled, sold by smugglers, that men would be beaten and sometimes shot to death if they tried to escape the smugglers, and that women were sometimes raped and arrived on the rescue ship pregnant.
Yeah, it still happens today. They just rescued, there were just in January, a bunch of boats that actually made it to Italy, to Lampedusa, and it's still going on today. Libya is hell on earth for especially sub-Saharan African migrants, because they're not treated well. Black people are treated terribly in Libya. And so they go through all kinds of abuse, and they have nowhere to go. I mean, essentially what they do is they get to the Libyan coast, and they can't, if they don't go to Europe, where are they going to go? Because there's a desert behind them that they just crossed.
Yeah.
So you can't really go back very easily once you get there. And so what they do is there's all these criminal groups. So it's a failed state, and it's governed by small groups, factions, strong men, what have you. And the migrants are just currency for them. If they have a migrant, then they can ask them to, then they can get the money from their family to smuggle them to Europe. And that's what they do. They just, grab them. They'll grab them off the streets and put them in a warehouse. They'll beat them. They'll shoot them. I heard so many stories about how they were abused in Libya that, it was horrifying. It was really, everybody really suffered in Libya. And I think in many ways, they didn't have a choice to get on those boats. That's how bad it was. Like, it was either, die or get on this boat and hope that it doesn't sink, right? Because for them, that's what Libya represented.
You write in your piece that at the time you didn't understand that kind of desperation, but that now you're getting just a taste of it, maybe just a glimpse of that sense of desperation.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can talk about what that means for you, what that desperation looks like for you.
I mean, I don't want to say that I understand it completely, because, I didn't get on a boat to cross the border into the state.
Yeah.
But I did have to leave a country that I didn't want to leave and go to one I didn't want to go to, right? I had to do that. I had to do it because I needed to feed my family. And that's why people are doing it. I think there's a great misunderstanding of migrants and immigrants. They think that, they're coming, they're going somewhere because they want to take jobs away from people, or they, all that most migrants and immigrants want is a little bit better life than the one they were living in, not only for themselves, but for their children.
Yeah.
And that's really the fundamental reason people move from one country to another. And that's a very, very honorable thing to do. It's not, it's not a crime, which is what it is here in the States. They're illegal aliens, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what the hell does that mean? It's not illegal to exist and want a better life. So, I saw that for I covered that as a journalist for many years. And the people that would get on the boat, on the rescue boats, had nothing. They had absolutely nothing. They had the clothes on their backs. They didn't have shoes, but they had their lives. They were alive. They survived. And they've gone on to live normal lives, like one guy's in Norway. He was, I'm trying to remember if he was from, I think he was Eritrean, and, he's married, he has children, he's living, a normal life, and that's what he was looking for. So I think there's a huge misunderstanding in the States about that right now. Everybody thinks they're criminals because the ruling class, the powers that be say that they're criminals. Right. Mm-hmm. But they're not, some of them are. I mean, but there's a lot of Americans who are criminals too, right? I mean, being a criminal doesn't have anything to do with your immigration status, and so I think that we need to start looking at people and understanding them as human beings and not as, not manipulate them as political pawns, which is exactly what's happening in the United States.
Steve, I want to close our discussion with a quote from your Substack piece. And you write, "What I fear is the economic squeeze that's coming. The job market is already a war zone. Tariffs will inevitably force up prices and slow growth. The shrinking middle class is going to shrink faster. It won't be a sudden collapse, but a drift toward it. The people I drive in my Uber are, like me, trying to navigate that drift. They're people who get up before dawn to feed their families, and they trust me to get them to work on time. I trust an app to buy me another day. None of us has any real leverage, like the migrants who survived the deadliest border crossing on the planet. We're all at the mercy of the sea." And I wonder if you can tell us what that means to you.
So, I've covered politics for 25 years, and I certainly feel like I've lost, like I maybe as a journalist for a big international news organization, I had a little bit of leverage, right? Because I could choose what to write about. And sometimes the powers that be, whoever was in power, didn't want me to write about that. Or they didn't want me to ask, why don't you apologize to the American president, for making fun of the fact that he was black.
Yeah, yeah.
So I could do that before. I can't anymore.
Hmm.
Right. And so now I find myself in that category of people who have no way of changing things, who
Hmm.
can't do anything about it except for try to figure out how to navigate through it. And I
Yeah,
think that's the way most people feel. Now, granted, there are those little things you can do, like vote, but
yeah,
that's it. Big companies have leverage. They come to Washington. They buy lobbyists. The
yeah.
lobbyists go and they essentially buy your congressman with campaign donations and stuff. So money has leverage. Big companies have leverage. Low income people don't. And often they don't have a voice either. The people that I saw coming over from Libya had no power whatsoever. They were completely disenfranchised. They had no voice. They had no access to the media, really, unless I gave it to them. Right? I was their access, and and even with that access, the policies didn't change. The policies are still a deadly policy. The European Union policy is still deadly. Italy's policy is still deadly. Uh, and they have no power to change it. They have no leverage whatsoever, right? And I think that that's the category that most Americans are in now. Granted, we have social media. Everybody can go online and say whatever they want, but you know, they don't really have any leverage. They don't have any leverage against the government. They don't have the money, um, or they don't have someone standing up for them that has some power. You know, and so that's kind of how I feel that like we're all just really trying to, make our way, muddle through, but we can't really change things. Now, I might be cynical and pessimistic, but that's kind of how I feel, I guess, right now.
So you've been on both ends of the spectrum, which is interesting. You've been a change maker. You've been an influencer. As you've said, you've moved markets with investigations that you ran and stories that you published. And now you drive an Uber and you help people get to their jobs early in the morning and come home late at night. And so with that point of view of sort of seeing both sides of the spectrum, I wonder what you see as what can people do when they hit a stumbling block like you've hit?
Well, I'll tell you, and I really appreciate that question because I didn't want to end it on a negative note. I think we all need to be cognizant and aware of the fact that we're connected.
Hmm.
And even no matter our income level, no matter our educational level, no matter what, no matter our religion, I think that we're all connected and we need to respect each other and we need to try and find what we have. We need to try and cultivate our commonalities more than our differences, which is not happening today in the United States. What I've tried to do, because I got such an overwhelming reaction, and many of them were former journalists who lost their jobs and found themselves in hot water like me. Others were just professionals. A lot of them were a certain age, middle-aged people who had a career and then lost it and then
Yeah.
had to reinvent themselves. But others are
Yeah.
just like Uber.
I'm one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, others are like Uber drivers and other professionals. And I just had an overwhelming response. And my impression was and I felt this myself, is just a real sense of solitude and that we're doing all this on our own, that we're struggling on our own. And I don't think it's just not true. There's a lot of us going through it, and you're
Mhm.
one of them just like me.
Mhm.
And what I have invited people to do on the Substack is send me their stories. Like,
Mhm.
send me your story, because people might find comfort in your story, that
Mhm.
it might resonate with them like mine did, it might touch a nerve. It might help them feel less alone. And so
Absolutely.
I'm trying to put out more stories that, some of them are, they're hard stories sometimes, they're struggles, but, hopefully people will feel less alone if they hear other people are going through the same thing.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you for your time today. I appreciate it immensely. I am cheering you on as you write, as you drive, as you figure out the next step for you. Thank you for taking the time to share your story.
Thank you for giving me the time. I really appreciate it, Jonathan.
Steve's got a remarkable story that is shared by many folks right now. In my spare time, one of my favorite things to do is to help people create or land jobs they love. And so if you're facing a job loss, I want to make this offer. Please feel free to reach out to me. We'll find time to connect, to take a peek at your resume, to think about what it is that lights you up, what you want to do next, and how you can get there. I can't, of course, guarantee you a job, but I can guarantee you a little help along the way. Please feel free to email me at jonathan@blockleadershipgroup.com or shoot me a text at 202-669-2379. Next week, I'm joined by Admiral Tim Ziemer, who is responsible for saving 12 million people from death by malaria despite extraordinary personal tragedies of his own. You don't want to miss his remarkable story. I'll see you next week on The Stumble.